All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. How many of you, is this your very first time here at the museum? Amazing, wonderful, welcome. So exciting to have you all here. How many of you, is this the first time you've heard of the museum? Like you've never heard of us before? A few of you, okay, cool. So those of you with your hands up, I have a task for you. Sometime in the next couple of days, please introduce the National Jazz Museum in Harlem to one of your friends, your neighbors, your family members. As a smaller nonprofit in New York City, marketing and getting our name out is one of the hardest parts. So we rely on you guys to help us spread the word. First timers, again, it's special that you're here. You took the time, you gave us a chance. You're going to have a great time, and we want to make sure we welcome you back. My name is Ryan Maloney. I work in the programming department here at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, and under the leadership of Tracy Hyder-Suffern, our executive director, and our creative artistic directors, Jonathan Batiste and Christian McBride, they all extend a big welcome and a thank you to you for coming out. Music on the Brain is a series we've been doing for a number of years now. It's a collaboration with the Zuckerman Institute over at Columbia University. It's given us an opportunity to look at different ways that music, movement, the brain, how we process music, what music means to us as humans, and how that really, when you get into the nuts and bolts of how the brain works, how those connections are made. And we've learned a lot over the last several years doing this program. The inaugural artist in resident at Zuckerman Institute was the great Helen Sung, pianist, and we did a number of programs with Helen over the years. And tonight will be our opportunity to introduce a new musician into the Music on the Brain family. I want to put out a big thank you to Kent in the back, who helps make all this happen. Thank you, Kent. And Alyssa Mayers, also at Zuckerman Institute. Did Alyssa come? There's rumors she may. Okay, all right. Well, big thank you to you too, Alyssa, if you're tuned in online. But we're going to get things going. It's a great opportunity to listen to some incredible music and to learn a little bit about the human body. So I'm going to get things started with our musician who's going to come out and lay the groundwork for the show for you. Please welcome the incredible band leader, composer, saxophonist, historian, and incredible kind of cultural messenger. Please welcome Mr. T.K. Blue. How's everybody? Can you hear me without the microphone? Yeah. We do need it for the stream. Oh, okay.
All right. So thank you very much. My name is T.K. Blue. T stands for Talib, which means student, and K stands for Kibwe, which means blessed. I'm a blessed student, and I want to stay a student all my life. I want to keep learning. On the piano from Chicago, please welcome Mr. Greg Murphy. So this is a very exciting program, Music and the Brain. I've always wondered, there's so much that goes on when you play music, and especially when you play jazz, because there's that spontaneous compositional aspect, which we call improvisation. Sometimes I try to get away from that word improv because for the layperson, some people think that improvisation means just playing anything that comes to your mind at the top of your head. And it's not actually the case, because improvisation or spontaneous composition requires a lot of study, intense study, harmonic study, melodic study, rhythmic study, and you have to study all types of music to get to a proficient level where you can now start to create on the harmonics of a song. So we're going, and I've always wondered in the brain what happens when we play. Little things like, for example, I remember playing and have some music on a music stand, but I'm not reading it. I'm playing. I'm not even looking at it. But if you took that stand away, I would start messing up. Now, how do you figure that out? That's something in the brain. Another thing is sometimes you can be performing and you could transport yourself to another dimension, to another place. I've had that happen. I've had another scenario where I was playing a concert in the first song. It was dedicated to a very close friend of mine. And when I played the last note of that first song, I felt his spirit, his presence in the room so profoundly, so compellingly that I started crying and I couldn't play anymore. And I literally told the audience, please get your money back. I'm going to pay the musicians. I'm going to tell the club owner, don't pay me, and because I can't play anymore. I'm too emotionally wound up thinking about my friend, my Uncle Benny Powell, who passed away. And so this stuff with the brain and the spirit and music, they're all intertwined. Have you been introduced already, Rachel?
I can do it after that.
Okay, so Rachel she's going to talk to you also a little bit about this whole concept of music and the brain and mind, body, and soul. She's a PhD candidate at Columbia University, so we're going to get started. We're going to start, the first song is a song called Follow the North Star. It's based on the life of Solomon Northup. This was a suite. I read his book when I was in college. I went to NYU first and then Columbia, and I read his book called 12 Years a Slave. I had no idea they were making a movie. And then I composed my suite in 2006. So around 2008, 2009, I got word, hey man, they're making the movie 12 Years a Slave. You got to get some of your music in this film, and you become famous and move to Hollywood and make a lot of money. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. But it's okay because I'm here tonight to play for you, so I'm good. I'm good. So we're going to start off with Follow the North Star. For Rachel Frazer.
Hello. Hi. Can you hear me, guys? Okay. That was awesome. Another hand for TK Blue. So yeah, I think originally we were going to talk kind of about the different topics that you mentioned in the beginning, but we can kind of just improvise and talk about whatever comes up. Do you have any? Oh, I guess I can reintroduce myself too.
Maybe explain to everyone what is the aspect of your work and study in regards to music and the brain.
So actually so I'm, as he mentioned, I'm a third-year PhD candidate at Columbia University, but actually my entire interest in neuroscience came from music, because I studied music therapy when I was in high school, and I wanted to know why it worked, but I couldn't find any real scientifically rigorous evidence to why music therapy worked so well. So I kind of went on this quest to try to understand that. And it led me to where I am now, which is in a lab that studies pain and touch. And so right now I'm trying to look at how touch and like social touch can be pain relieving. But in the future, I'd love to study how music itself can be pain relieving, and how listening to music, playing music, how that can alleviate both emotional but also physical pain as well. So that's where it kind of connects.
No, that's fantastic. I'm always wondering if, we've heard this saying a lot that young students in school who study music, who play an instrument, excel in mathematics and science. And again, these are some cross transmigration of knowledge. Playing music, on the surface, somebody said, well, playing music, how does that relate to world geography or, or mathematics? Well, mathematics for sure, because music is, you're dealing with mathematics, you're dealing with intervals, you're dealing with scales, you're dealing with, overtone series. So there's a lot of mathematics involved in music. So I definitely can understand the aspect of music and mathematics correlating. Science is well, and I'm really fascinated. Maybe I don't know if you've heard that saying, but is there anything that you can draw upon to give us an example of how science and music, how they correspond? Because I'm curious even myself, because I've heard this expression that students who play music excel in science.
I mean, I personally can relate from my own upbringing as a musician. Actually helped me become a better scientist because I learned how to overcome stage fright, for one thing, which is really important for scientific talks, and also to overcome failure, which in music you kind of have to deal with. Just in order to get better, you have to fail more times. It's not about succeeding more times, but however many times you practice. And with science, it's the same way. You have to be ready to fail and not afraid of failing, and basically just be able to be creative in that way. And also being a musician, you kind of flex that creative muscle. That also helps with science as well, thinking outside the box.
And there's also the other thing, has everybody heard this expression called stage fright? Butterflies. And that's, and it's a very interesting concept. I get it every time I play, no matter where I play. And it's a good thing, because it kind of perks up your energy and your awareness, and you're like, it can be detrimental if it's to the point of nervousness that you cannot perform. And I've also have seen things online of people who are into psychiatry, who offer therapy for musicians to overcome. Some musicians won't overcome that, and they'll just be too nervous to perform in front of people, where others do it effortlessly. So I think, again, this is that whole gray area of the brain. As I was explaining to Rachel, the interesting thing with jazz, it's such a universal music because you go all over the world. I lived in Paris for close to 10 years. I speak French. Anybody here speak French? All right. Oh, bonsoir. Ça va? All right. So jazz is such a universal music. In fact, when I first moved to Paris, one of the first groups I played with, nobody could communicate. No one. Because I only spoke English. The Japanese guy, all he spoke was Japanese. French guy, all he spoke was French. There was a guy from Africa, all he spoke was Douala. Another guy from Senegal, all he spoke was Wolof. So, but we were able to play together. So, we found the common language in jazz. But the gray area comes in, is in the mind, what is this thing about improvisation? Why is it so appealing to musicians? Why is creating, and again, when I'm saying improvisation, we just played a song, it had a basic tonal center, and then we were able to extrapolate and play all kind of notes that were not necessarily in that tonal center, but we made it work. Basically, one of my teachers told me in music there is never a wrong note. It all depends what note you play before, what note you play after. There's never a wrong note. So you can play any song and improvise and play any note, but you got to know what note to play before that note and what note to play after. That's what gives that note validity, So these are all very interesting concepts in terms of how do we emotionally prepare ourselves to perform. As I asked Rachel the other day, we talked, and I was wondering, when you play music, the chemical endorphin that they say comes when you exercise, and it hits your pleasure center, which is why I went riding my bike this morning. When I finished my 15-mile bike ride, I felt high. It was a natural high. And that's this chemical, and I'm sure that chemical plays a part in music, Because, you know, why is it that, you know, you have what you call a jam session, you have all these musicians coming to play for free. Now, why is that? Musician playing, studying all their life, but they'll go to a jam session and play for free. Try getting a doctor to give you some surgery for free. Try, you know, it's not going to happen. You know, try calling up a carpenter and say, hey, man, can you make some cabinets and just get a good feeling from it? You know, it ain't going to happen. But it happens in music all the time. All the time. I can't remember, listen, I remember early in my career traveling to far places for absolutely no money. Just the prospect of knowing that I'm going to perform was enough, you know, when I was first starting out. So these are some of the things I think that we want to address and talk about. Kent, I know there's another gentleman who's also involved in this, Cantor. Ken is all the way in the back. Please give him a big hand, too, because he's been very instrumental in helping to put this together. And do we have any questions before because we're going to play another song, but we can, some of the things we talked about, is any questions anybody have? Yes.
People often say about left brain activity or right brain activity. Is there any sort of clinical evidence to say how jazz music improvises those?
Between the left and right brain.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you asked that question because we had a conversation yesterday and it sparked me to do some research. And I found a study about jazz guitarists, and they split up expert jazz guitarists versus like novice jazz guitarists. And they, you know, the left brain, for those of you who might not know, is typically associated with more like logical thinking, mathematics and things like that, whereas the right brain has been thought to be more about creativity. But actually for jazz guitarists, for those who were novice, meaning that they were like pretty new to playing jazz guitar, their right brain was going crazy when they were improvising. They like hooked up like electrodes to their brain. And their right brain had more activity because they were not as experienced. They didn't have a lot of theory to draw off of. So they had to be more creative in that way. But the more experienced jazz musicians, their left brain was actually being more activated. So the more logical, more based off of previous practice, rigorous study, things like that, that was actually being more activated, and that was their way of also showing creativity. So it doesn't mean that creativity is only on the right side, but that sometimes, you know, you need to draw off of previous knowledge and previous study in order to be creative as well. So that's a really good question.
You know, and the great Charlie Parker, he had a very famous saying. He said, learn everything you can about your instrument. Learn everything you can about music, and then forget it all and just play. Now, what does that mean? And I started, you know, it took me years to ponder that statement, because I said, wait, it sounds like a paradox. Learn everything you can about this instrument and music, and then forget it and just play. But then I understood, as I progressed in my studies, and in terms of when you play, especially jazz, and you improvise, you don't want it to sound theoretical. You want it to sound mechanical. You don't want it to sound like we're regurgitating exercises. You know, you want it to sound like music. Exercises to me is exercise. It's rehearsal. It's not music. You know, so you want it to sound, you want it to be a flow. You know, interesting thing, I just read yesterday online, the great Wayne Shorter, who we just lost a few weeks ago. Great saxophone. I had a chance to meet him and hear him many, many times. Very interesting thing, he online, the bassist from England, who I'm having a mental block right now, who played with Miles, Dave Holland. Wayne welcomed him into the band with Miles Davis and helped him quite a bit. And they were rehearsing for a concert. So they went over this music, and they took a break. Everybody got something to eat. Then they came back, and somebody in the band said, might have been Herbie, or somebody said, hey man, let's just go over maybe one or two of those songs. There were two that were a little rough. You know what Wayne said? Wayne said, how can you rehearse the unknown? And and they didn't rehearse anymore. He said, how can you rehearse the unknown? So that's the key, I think, when we play, is to get to the level of the unknown. I want to get to the level where I practice a lot in repetition so that I don't have to think about execution. and to get to the level where I can play the unknown, things that I've never heard before. One time, Miles Davis asked Wayne Shorter, he said, "Hey, Wayne, did you ever feel like playing music that doesn't sound like music?" How do you know, these are all very interesting concepts. But you had a question, yes. Speak very loud, yes.
That's a great question. I think that more studies are now being done in regards to like specific instruments. Did everybody hear the question? Okay. Yeah. So I think, like personally, not in my hands because I study mice right now, so I'm not working with humans yet. But I know that like with fMRI studies, for example, when they look at someone's brain while they're listening to a certain type of music, pretty much everywhere in your brain lights up. Like every part of your brain is pretty much activated. But as TK was mentioning, endorphins are released when we're listening to or playing music. Also dopamine, which is like the pleasure hormone, basically. So that's definitely released when we listen to and play music. Oxytocin is released when we are in a group of people or we're singing together, things like that. The oxytocin levels in the blood increase. But that's something that I'm definitely like really interested in when it comes to all the different types of music, right? Because there's classical music, there's jazz, there's all the other ones, hip hop, right? Whatever it is. And I think it's really important to have like these cultural like contexts of music and how they affect people differently based on their own lived experiences. And I think not enough of that has been done, that kind of research. Most of it's been like, oh, what happens to your brain when we play Mozart or something like that, like the typical classical music. So I think we need more rigorous and like objective studies about that for sure. That's a great question.
I think we're gonna play another song that's a little different, and then we'll go back to some more questions and discussions. We're gonna play a song now that is called "The Wise One Speaks," and this one is dedicated to the great master, Dr. Randy Weston, NEA Jazz Master. I've had the pleasure of working with him for many, many years. I was his musical director, and once we had a performance in Austria, and after he called a meeting. And a very interesting meeting because I thought he was going to talk about the music. And he didn't want to talk about any music. He just said, as a musician, it's not about just making a gig. You have to give to the world. You have to heal the world. You have to share your gift. It's not about just making a gig and making money. And it was very, very profound what he was saying. And it inspired me to compose a song called The Wise One Speaks. Now I'm going to play this instrument on this song, which has different names, depending upon where you find it in Africa. This one is called the kalimba. You find this in the southern part of Africa, but you also have in East Africa the mbira, the sanza, lukembe. Also, I just found a new one in Senegal when I was there in 2019 called bongo. So I'm gonna play this for you. We're gonna do this song called The Wise One Speaks, and then we'll do some more Q&A. By the way, I want to mention that a lot of the folks who play this instrument are considered the griot or jolly, J-A-L-I, or griot, G-R-I-O-T. These are the oral historians of particular African societies. So these people, male or female, they learn these instruments, they master these instruments, not just the kalimba, but also string instruments, the kora, could be the drum, could be the talking drum. They master these instruments and they know the history of their people. They can go back many generations. So what would happen is if you lived in that area, and let's say you were having somebody in your family was getting married, you would hire a griot or jolly to perform at the wedding. And they would sing praises about your great, 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 great grandfather, what his name was, where he lived, what kind of work he did, where he traveled. Your great, great, great grand aunt, what was her name? Where did they know all of this is up here? It's quite fascinating. And they pass this information down to their prodigy. And they in turn learn it, they pass it down to their children, and it keeps going. So it's a very interesting concept, the jolly or the griot. Anybody have any questions you want to ask? Yes.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned about the novice versus the more experienced guitarists and how their brain works. But with age, how does it differ with jazz music and playing it? How do the connections differ? How does it?
With, you saying with age?
Yeah, as
How-
you get older.
Well, well,
Depends on how much you practice.
yeah. I mean, unless you're a prodigy, and there are many. Well, I won't say there are many that we may not know of, but unless you're a prodigy, you're only going to get better as you age. You have to put in the time. You have to put in the practice. But the other aspect of playing music is life experience goes into your music. So if you're 14 or 15, you have a life experience, but you don't have the same life experience as somebody who's 60 or 65. They've seen a little bit more. They've internalized a little bit more, so that when they perform or when they compose, it's going to be a little bit more information readily available, as opposed to somebody. And it's not to negate the validity of any musician who was a teenager, because I just played in Ottawa, Canada, back in December, and I had a young kid who is 12 years old who plays piano absolutely magnificently, and he's 12. And all he did during the pandemic, when he was 10, he just practiced like 8 hours a day, but he practiced listening to Thelonious Monk, Red Garland, Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea. He listened to all of the great pianists, and he imitated. And this kid is incredible. But, I mean, those are anomalies. For the most part, you have to be patient. You have to practice. You got to practice to where things become intuition. You don't have to think about it. Because when we're playing, when we're improvising, I'm not thinking in my head what note I'm going to play. I'm not going, oh, okay, Greg is playing this chord. I'm going to play a C7. No, I don't think like that. I did when I was young. No, I'm serious. I did when I was young, but as I got better and more mature, I don't think that way anymore.
Yeah, they've actually done ethnographic studies about people who just practice the most, and they sorted them in between how many hours a week they practice, and also their level of expertise. So somebody could be the same age as another musician, and for example, and they'll have very different, musical prowess based on how much they practice, for sure. But when you do practice, you have connections in your brain that get stronger and stronger. I think neuroplasticity is a good way to describe it. But it's like neurons that fire together, wire together. I don't know if you've heard that before. It's kind of like a cute little term. But it's true. When you practice one thing over and over and over again, the connections in your brain become stronger, and then it becomes easier to do that more effortlessly. So
Absolutely.
with time.
And I think that goes pretty much in every field. The more you work at it, the more you practice, the better you'll get, to the point where you don't have to think about it, and it just becomes second nature. That's the key. Any other questions? Yes. Could you stand up and we can answer?
I think I heard you say the term social touch, and I've never heard that before, other than maybe just related to social contact. But I'd love to hear about the idea of social touch, and then maybe how it's experienced and related to music.
Okay.
I kind of threw that term around a little bit. Social touch it's kind of like an overarching umbrella term. But specifically, so I study mice, and we look at these specific neurons in the skin, that when you activate these neurons, it induces a social touch-like posture. It makes a mouse look as though they were being touched by a friend, like a massage or something on their back, or being groomed. Or in, reproductive things. So that's kind of the social touch that we're looking at, but there's also many other types of social touch neurons that we're interested in the lab that I'm in particular. But usually when I think about social touch, a pat on the shoulder or a back rub, things like that, between someone that you care about, and how can that potentially be pain relieving for physical pain, but also emotional pain. But yeah, with music, I definitely think our bodies perceive sound as much or as maybe more as our ears. because we feel vibration and we can feel the different frequencies even if we're not very aware of it. So I'm very interested in that, how can our bodies perceive sound, and how can that kind of simulate social touch as well, and how can that potentially be pain relieving?
Yeah, the interesting thing about touch too, I can just relate to what I do. It's very interesting. Like I've experienced sometimes cutting by accident one of my fingers, like right on the tip, and I have to put a Band-Aid on, and then I go to play my instrument. I can still play it, but it's not the same. One finger, one Band-Aid. I can't explain it, but the key doesn't feel the same, and the sensation is just. I can still play it, but it's definitely a handicap, and that's just from one finger, just not being able to touch to feel the contact with that key on the saxophone or on the flute. And I think that's very interesting. I can never figure that out. The other thing too is that I've noticed, for example, your cap. Now some of these, this one is plastic. I have some that are metal. And I noticed that when I put like the music stand, like a lot of times I'll have a music stand I'm practicing. So I take my cap off and I put it on the stand and I'm playing long tones, which is the most boring thing for musicians, for horn players to practice, but it's the most essential. And you just hold the tone out. For as long as you can, but that strengthens your embouchure, strengthens your mouth. But I notice when I play a certain note, that mouthpiece that's sitting on the thing starts doing like this. It's true. So because there's physics involved in music. There's physics. So when you play an instrument, you're putting out sound waves, and these sound waves are physical. That's why music can really affect people in a good way or in a bad way. I saw a short clip. I had to turn it off. It was too horrific, but it was a clip of some, I don't know what kind of music this was. It was loud, and the audience started going, they were flinging their arms and hitting each other and fighting. I couldn't believe it. I said, what kind, I don't understand. I try to keep an open ear for all styles of music, but there's some types of music that I cannot personally relate to, especially music like that. It causes people to start fighting. I don't feel it. But yeah. Mm-hmm. How you doing? Stand up.
What's your name?
Hi, Rachel. My name is Andre Toussaint. I'm from Zuckerman Institute in your lab.
You see me live?
He's a plant.
See me live.
I'm wondering if the context in which one learns and produces music is important. I'm thinking about, there's context where it may be a very painful context. Beautiful music can be produced. Think about people during slavery, for instance. Beautiful music can be produced then. Or is it you need a nice enriching environment to produce beautiful music? Which is more?
I have a little. Could you? I'm sorry, sir, because I was trying to. Could you come? Yeah, could you use the mic because I can really hear everything? Yeah. Thanks.
Hello.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
The question was about context.
Context.
The context in which one learns and produces beautiful music. Because we've seen situations where people can produce beautiful music in times of struggle, heartache. And there's situations where it's jubilee, and you can produce beautiful music that way too. So which one is more important?
Well,
How much is it
I think they're both important. I think that, but you did hit on something very, very profoundly. In fact, it's going to lead us into our last composition, which is a blues. And without the blues, you wouldn't have jazz. Without the blues, you wouldn't have rock. Without the blues, you wouldn't have a lot of music that we find here in the United States. The blues is the grandfather to, and I know this for a fact because I studied this. I taught history of jazz, history of rock at Long Island University. So I did some research, and I was shocked at the similarities in the beginning. Then there was offshoots, of course, where one style went in a different direction. But the blues was born out of adversity. The blues was born out of the period what we call in the United States Reconstruction. This is after slavery, which for many blacks in the United States was even worse than slavery. After slavery was actually in some cases worse, because now they couldn't even get things to eat. They had to find things to eat, things like that. And it was very hard. They were disenfranchised, couldn't vote. Life was very, very hard for people of color in the United States during the period of Reconstruction. It's when the blues came into being. Now, to talk about the blues, we got to go back to Africa, to griots and the Jolly, because the way they sang, when they would sing, the history of their people was very similar to the early blues singers in the Mississippi Delta. There's been several books on this concept of this shared correlation between the musics of the Jolly and griot in West Africa and the music we find in the rural blues in Mississippi Delta. Robert Johnson going back, Lead Belly going back to that generation. And the blues became a music, it's a music that fostered hope. It was a music that enabled one to, like catharsis, get it out, get the pain out through the notes you're playing, and you feel better afterwards. You know, it's a very interesting thing. In fact, we're gonna play it for you now, then we can talk some more, okay? We're gonna do a blues for you now called Moods of Parker. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Mr. Greg Murphy on the piano. I know our time is kind of short, but anybody have some questions about the blues or about anything that we talked about today? Any other? Yes, yes. Maybe we can give you a microphone. 1 second. Yeah.
Thank you, both of you, for that lovely, lovely piece. Just as a follow-up to the earlier question and your answer, can you describe any of your feelings as you were playing that piece, or what you might have been thinking of when you composed it, and how that differs or interacts with how when you perform it?
Yeah. Well, that piece, that piece was dedicated to the great Charlie Parker. As you know, Charlie Parker was an anomaly because he had completely changed the course of music in the course of history, despite having such a challenged life. And I mean, challenged from the aspect of being a heroin addict at the age of 10 or 11. And he remained a heroin addict throughout his life. He only made 34. When he died at the age of 34, when the coroner wrote out the report, it put Negro male, approximate age 65. He was only 34. So when I play things like that, I think about Bird, I think about the hard life that he had, but the great beauty that he created within that framework. And so, you know, that's kind of what I was thinking about when I played this song for him. I was just, you know, knowing that, you know, he had a hard life because of his drug addiction and the things that he experienced, and then also not getting, he did get recognition, of course, but not the kind of recognition that he should have gotten as a genius of 20th century music. He completely changed the way we think about music, how we improvise, how we think about harmony. Before Charlie Parker, in the swing period, you know, folks improvised on the lower parts of the chord, but Charlie Parker heard the upper parts of the chord. And so he played those notes that a lot of the swing players, they didn't play those notes necessarily, and he found a way to connect them. He was a genius. He was a prodigy. I think he was definitely gifted, but I don't want to negate that he practiced, because he did practice. And that's something a lot of people say, oh, Charlie Parker was a genius, he didn't practice. He was born to play the horn. No, he was gifted. No, there's no denying that. But I have in fact, there is I have it on my computer, on YouTube. He's given a lesson. It's a very rare audio clip of Charlie Parker giving a saxophone lesson to somebody and say, okay, you gotta go through the keys, you gotta play, and he's playing. It's astounding when I hear it. But that's what I was thinking about. Let's ask Greg, what were you thinking about when you played this?
Well, one of the things I was thinking about, one of the things that I wasn't thinking about was like what happens when I play something that's kind of correct, or that when I'm playing the right thing, I get a feeling in my brain. You know, sometimes it's like tingling up and down the spine. You know, I get that when I'm playing right, or when I hear somebody playing, and I don't know what right is, but I'm saying when I'm like practicing and I'm okay, I think I'm doing a good job. My brain lets me know. It tingles, you know. And, you know, it's just, I remember once when I heard John Coltrane play, and I was listening to a lot of his versions of one of his compositions, what's the name of that tune? Impressions, right? And so he did a whole bunch of, but like one particular recording, I just felt continual tingles up and down my spine from what Train was playing. And you know, Ron Carter said some stuff too. He's like, the reason why sometimes music gets suppressed is because it has such a positive effect. You know, it can lift people off the ground, you know.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm probably loud enough.
sometimes people, is that the same kind of tingle that people get when they get goosebumps? Is that what you're describing?
Different.
It's no, it's
Okay.
different. It's a little different.
Oh, okay, because.
Yeah.
Similar but different.
It's
Okay,
yeah,
because
it's in the same category, but it's different.
so here's why I'm asking. Some people would call that, like in German, it would be called the Geist. It would be called like the spirit. And so in whatever the spirit is, some kind of connection to, you mentioned transcendence. So my question is then, in terms of neurology, are there studies that talk about that type of an emotional connection, or is it an emotional connection? Clearly something's happening. Do we know what it is?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of kind of ineffable aspects of music that we don't necessarily have representations for in the brain just yet. But I say yet because I think there's research being done about those questions, like even the aspect of flow, like when you get into the flow when you're playing music or something like that. Like we can't necessarily measure that just now, but it's a very real feeling that lots of people experience. And people say like you feel the vibe, or you feel the rhythm, or you feel, right, all of these, like saying feel, but are we physically feeling it, or is it in our heads, or is it in our emotions? What does it mean to really feel music is still a big question. But there's a lot of research being done about like spirituality and things like that, even at Teachers College at Columbia. So maybe we can talk more after.
It's a very, very great question. Because music, it allows us to transcend this physical space. Like when I'm playing and I close my eyes, sometimes I'm not even here. I'm in another zone. I'm in another place. And I've experienced playing, like we play with a drummer. He's a dear friend of ours, George Coleman Jr. And sometimes I want to look over to give him a cue, like I'm getting ready to end. But George, when he plays, his total mind, body, and spirit is in that music. And I look over to give him a cue, and he's like this. And man, I let him go. I said, no, the spirit got him. Going back to what you were saying, I remember one time playing and got so emotional. I started screaming. I couldn't get it out through the horn. I just started screaming. I mean, not long, but I just said, ah! Because I kept trying to get it out, but the horn it almost became like a block, an interference of the emotion inside. So I just had to, Kenny Garrett, NEA Jazz Master, he's going to be inducted this weekend. Same, I've seen Kenny Garrett perform, and at a certain point, he puts the horn, he just starts screaming, because we get very emotional. And our spirit is into the sound, and it's the only way we can get it out,
In the same regards to that, but also what you were speaking about earlier with like the power that music has, because it does have that power to kind of make us transcend or whatever it is. It can do that very positively, but also can do it very negatively in certain, depending on the intent of the music or how it was produced or something. Then there's been music used for torture, although music is such a powerful tool that it can be used for such amazing things, but we also have to be careful. Even when we self-medicate, I like to say sometimes we self-medicate with music that makes us feel sad or something, so we can get through a hard time. But we have to be careful with that because of the messages that are being sent to us, right? So I always try to advocate for being very careful.
Definitely, and I highly recommend everyone try to if you can, go online and try to pull up any type of traditional African music. Because when you see, I spent a lot of time in Africa. I did several State Department tours, and I've been to many countries there, practically all of the continent. And the music is so different, but there are in every culture they have certain secret societies of music that it's actually mind-boggling. You wouldn't believe it. You would look at it, but you're not going to believe it. I was looking at something, yesterday, online, of some traditional African drumming, and they called this, the gentleman, the griot who was in the middle of the circle, he was called something dealing with fire, like the master. He was the master of fire. Yes, and he laid in this pit, this burning pit of fire with embers, with wood, and he was dancing in it. No, his clothes did not burn. His skin did not burn.
'Cause the endorphins.
I'm looking at this. He was stepping on. In Morocco they have lilas. Same lilas. They have the Ganawa musicians who play, and they reach such a pitch, spiritually, emotionally, that some of the people who are there in the lila, they'll start cutting themselves, and there's no blood. They take a knife and no blood, no blood. And they're dancing. So how do we explain that? What I don't know how to explain. How can this? If anybody here was to sit in a pit of fire, we all know what the consequences going to be. I mean, come on, we already know. But to see this guy sitting in it, and the flames are all around him, and he's dancing. But the interesting thing is when you see these kind of things, in Africa, they all are accompanied with music. Never by itself. Always with music. In fact, every aspect of traditional African society, and I have to use the word traditional because if you go to the big cities in Africa, you might as well be in New York City. You're going to have the same thing you have here. But if you go to the country, to the bush, now you're going to see the real stuff, the traditional stuff. And that's where you have this kind of stuff going on, the music of healing. And then, of course, they have music that, everything in Africa, there's music for every aspect, from birth to death, and everything in between, harvesting, puberty, circumcision, whatever there's music for every wedding, every single aspect, there's specific type of music. And there's no such thing as audience and musicians. We're all one. So you never sit there. Like here in the West, we sit and listen. In Africa, you don't do that. You get up and dance. Or you start singing, or you start clapping, or you grab something, shakeré or something, and you start shaking, but you get involved with the music. It becomes one. And that's what makes music so sacred, because it brings us all together. Look, we all here together tonight. We don't know each other, but I feel connection with all of you because of the music that we've just shared. So that's the spiritual thing, I think, that of music. I think we're about at the end of our time, huh? So, yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Greg Murphy, Rachel Frazer, yours truly, T.K. Blue, and Ken Cantor. Thank you so much. And just to let you know, we're going to do this again in April the 25th. So we'll do some different types of music, and if you have any other questions, please feel free to come. God bless you all.